Welcome, obviously. Before we go into where we are now in the 5th year of the Master Investor Conference, this is actually my 3rd and my 2nd as the MC. I want to take you back to Norway. This is me in Norway in 2018, and it's actually the beginning of my longevity journey. This is me actually asleep in a lay-by. I was about 12 hours into a bike ride, which was actually from Trondheim to Oslo, and you can see on the map there it was a fair amount of Norway that was being covered. And this is my friend Richard. I did the trip with him, and the view on the top right-hand corner is when we were on the train going from Oslo up to Trondheim to then cycle back. And I'm a big fan of the Financial Times, and I read this article in the FT. So this was June 2018. This was about Juvenescence and Jim Mellon, organization as well as an individual that are very well known to all of you. And it's, as they say, a mind once expanded by a new idea never returns to its original size. And from that point, I was wanting to find out way more about what longevity was all about and understand whether it was worth my while as an individual to throw myself into that industry. So started reading, as you do, read the MIT sort of seminal thing with Aubrey de Grey. I read this very condescending book about biohacking and the problem of death. Obviously read Jim's Juvenescence book. And really what I found was that there was a very, very interesting and early stage industry that was really formulating. And I decided to throw myself completely in. So this is Harriet. She's from my team. We had 2 rooms where we had all these glass walls around us. And you can see we were looking at, is it news, is it investment, is it research? We didn't even have a website back in those days. But we got a couple of journalists, and we decided to see if we could run in stealth mode a publication about longevity. And when you're writing a publication or you're deciding to go to market, you've got to decide who your customers are. And originally, you can see here, you might recognize some of these people if you're in the London scene. They're actually investors that we were trying to profile to understand how could we communicate with them about longevity, and was longevity ready to receive their capital. The top right-hand corner is the original map that we had of the longevity industry, which has developed quite a lot since then. And the personas, as we call it, the people that we were targeting back then was investors, but actually our persona base has really moved out. We're now working with consumers, obviously investors, but also corporates, whether those corporations are big pharma, which obviously we all know big pharma is a big component of this industry, as well as food conglomerates, because everybody's starting to get longevity now, and it's a fast-growing field. As you can see, my entry was in 2018. The industry now has raised probably 7.8 billion is our projection for 2022. Obviously, there's been a challenge in what's happening with the biotech space, but now we're seeing that the industry has moved from whether it's self-perception of myself, but likewise everybody else, that it's now moving into a much more serious phase. So really, as you can see, there's a lot of capital coming into the industry. The mainstream media is starting to get on longevity. But of course, there are still some very fundamental questions associated with everything that we're going to talk about today. So, when will the science be valid? When is this actually going to make it into the market? And likewise, how is it going to be validated into the marketplace? Because of course, it's not just about fixing diseases, it's about preventing those diseases in the first place. So really the vocabulary that we're all now using has very much developed over the last few years. And this is why. So over 3 trillion every year in the US goes against the diseases of aging. Here they all are, all the greats. You've got cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and they cost an endless amount to healthcare systems. But embedded within all of this, of course, is the trauma associated with these for not only health systems, but families and also the individuals themselves. And I guess that sometimes when we look objectively at longevity and a lot of the science that's in longevity, we kind of forget that a lot of it actually comes back to us as well. It's an existential subject matter, which I still find quite amazing that people will spend more on a car than they will on their own health. So we wanted to understand how we could start to calibrate and count the industry as an organization. So Longevity.Technology is a media publication, but we also have a research arm. And we've spent the last year really in the tunnel. From the conference that we were here last year to this year, we've now actually really got to a position where we can start to count the capital that's coming into the industry. But we had to categorize it. So as you can see here, when you look at longevity, it sits across these three domains. So obviously you've got the determinants, what you're born with, but also the environment that you live in. You've got on the right-hand side the diseases of aging that, of course, we're all very aware of. But likewise, in the middle is the new area of this science that we're talking about, these aging drivers. And everybody's aware of the hallmarks of aging. There's been a few new ones announced recently through a conference in Copenhagen. And you can see that a lot of the companies that are in the longevity space and those that we'll be talking today will be talking about some of these key areas, these key drivers associated with the molecular levels associated with longevity. And when you look at the paradigm of where we all are at the moment, it's this concept of fixing one disease at a time. Once the disease has actually happened, is really the world that we're all in, and the healthcare infrastructure that we've got is very geared towards that at the moment. So the concept of longevity is not only scientific, it's organizational as well. But the way that we look at the world now, of course, is being in a position where we can target those drivers, to look at a preventative strategy, to be in the process where obviously what happens is you're focusing in the middle, and you're preventing not only one disease, but you're focusing on multiple diseases, and you're in a position where you can either halt or potentially even reverse the progression of those diseases. So you can see here we have these four pillars. So on in the middle between the determinants and the drivers is prevention. It's prevention of those drivers taking hold of your body. And of course, as we start to get towards 60, these become more prevalent, and obviously there are a lot of preventative strategies which you can help from getting people into these positions where they have these drivers in their body. But likewise, if you're in a position where you can reverse those, or at least halt them, then of course that's a very good way of preventing those actual diseases from happening. And of course, at the end, you've got the treatment layer, and the treatment, of course, is where there's lots of amazing science going on. And I think that really its treatment is one of the key demarcations between longevity and regular healthcare, because at the end of the day, we're trying to prevent those treatments from really having to be in place in the first place. But of course, sitting underneath all of this is diagnostics. And the diagnostics argument and what's happening in the space is really interesting at the moment. There's been a lot of debate over the last couple of months about epigenetic testing and the different types of testing. But of course, the diagnostics that help us understand where we are as individuals is really important. So this is an organization underneath here that's approaching things in a longevity way. We're working with an organization called Cyclarity, and they sit in that renewal box there. So what they're doing is they're actually helping people that are showing very, very early signs of plaque buildup in their arterial system to actually remove that plaque before it becomes cardiovascular disease. And as you can see, you can avoid yourself being there in the first place by the pillars of good diet, good sleep, keep your stress levels down, and likewise supplementation. But likewise, these new epigenetic clocks and these new ways of testing, which for some people are consumer products, but for doctors, of course, they're now becoming very interesting prescription tools as well. They are then in the position where you're downstream helping to avoid these things happening in the first place. So we as an organization look at what we call the domains of longevity. And we've had a lot of work as a team, a lot of debate as a team to understand what those domains are. And our organization runs reports associated with each of those domains, but likewise, we deeply analyze all of the companies in the space, over 560 of them now, and they all sit within these domains. So these are the 25 domains of longevity as we see them. A lot of them you'll recognize. Some of them you might find quite interesting. For example, companion longevity or pet longevity is something that we consider to be very much part of the longevity landscape now. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about all of those in a moment. But you can see when you bring all of those together, the migration from where we were back in 2019 to where we are now is really, this is, as we would see it now, the definitive map associated with longevity in terms of its component parts. So we've now been breaking down the industry and the organizations that are in those areas of the graphic there to understand what's their capitalization, what's their clinical progress, where are they in terms of their progression towards being therapies and solutions. And we've been working with George Church of Harvard University, who's helped us understand and move this around a little bit. So this is now, as far as we're concerned, how it looks. And then in terms of the numbers, this is what it looks like in terms of the capital. So this is the last 5 years associated with those 25 domains. And you can see that reprogramming, which has attracted a lot of capital, a lot of it very recently as well through Jeff Bezos and the work with Altos. You can see that there are some very big areas in the industry now. And then obviously on the longer tail, they're not necessarily smaller, they're just earlier. So the fact is that there's a lot happening in the space, and you can see there's some plateaus there. Obviously, it drops down over diagnostics, but there's some very exciting things happening in the long tail of this industry as well. So I'm going to be going through some data. So if you want to use the QR, that'll get you my contact details. I'm happily going to send you the deck when I'm on the train on the way home this evening. So it's coming up again later, so if you need it again, it will be there in a moment. So let's talk about some of these domains, because I feel that it's very interesting to really understand what's happening in those domains, to understand not only the science, but the progress of those. So a little bit of theory here. So in the clinical pipeline, people talk about IND and phase 1 and phase 2. What that actually means is whether you're in human or not in human. So the preclinical area that we're talking about this morning is everything up into IND enabling, which obviously is, as you can see, is number 5 on the scale there. And this scale of 1 to 10 is actually used by NASA. This is NASA's technology readiness level score. So the middle is the TRL, and then above and below is the way that the biotech industry looks at those TRLs. And what we do is we classify things via TRLs. So cellular reprogramming is that big one at the beginning of the chart. You can see that it's actually quite an interesting area by the capital it's attracting, but the concept of what's happening within cellular reprogramming is very exciting. It's been able to maintain the identity of a cell, but rewind its age back to an earlier state. And the companies that are in this space are pretty significant. You can see here Altos, they've raised 3.27 billion in capital. That, as we understand, is from Jeff Bezos and a few other deep-pocketed investors. The interesting thing is, as a media organization, we are in constant contact with Altos, but they don't want to run articles with us because they don't see themselves at this stage as a longevity company. And you can see there's quite a big drop between Altos and BitBio, but again, you can see the capital that's moving into the space is very, very interesting. But when you look at where they are along the bottom, none of them are really in human at this stage. So there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of expectation in reprogramming, but the evidence isn't there yet. But of course, it's one of those areas that could be very, very disruptive to the healthcare systems and the way that we approach health in the long term. So regeneration, again, this is one of the R's, reprogramming, regeneration, rejuvenation. This is very exciting because this is happening not only at a cellular level, but as you can see there from the device on the end, that's an artificial heart. That actually regeneration and keeping the human engine going to achieve potentially that longevity escape velocity is a very important part of what's happening in that particular area of the industry. And the key thing is that this is in human now. As you can see, the Mesoblasts, they're getting some pretty interesting fundraisers. They've got just shy of 50 million on their last round. But again, there's some companies there that are in preclinical. But the point is that actually this is a very interesting attribute to the industry. And then when you move on to the next phase, which is really where you look at the genetic level, where you're looking really at the fundamentals of human genetics, we're really programmed to get to the point where we'll genetically die at 122 as a maximum. So there's got to be a way that you look at that. And really interesting, because gene therapies are one of those things that have been around for a lot longer than the concepts around longevity in many respects. You can start to see that the exits are starting to happen now. So you can see that you've got the likes of Novartis and Bayer getting involved in these companies and participating in the exits. And of course, a lot of the investors in the room here today will be making those leaps of faith into these companies that don't necessarily have the exit trajectory that you might think they have. So we're going to be talking to investors today about how they look at that. But we are seeing now already big pharma getting involved in the deals that we're working with, but likewise they are an opportunity to then help those companies get through to phase 3, which, as we all know, is a very expensive process. So pet longevity, as I mentioned earlier, I think dogs are fascinating because they We share the same environments as them. They get the diseases of aging like us. They get arthritis and diabetes and so on. And they have shorter lives than us. So really they are two things. They are an amazing model organism to help organizations run their clinical trials, but likewise they're a great bridgehead for the concept of longevity to get into the mainstream, for people to start thinking and seeing the evidence of these therapies applied to animals. And again, that's attracting capital. There's some smaller organizations, of course, but as you can see, these are not in human, they're in animal, as it were. But of course, there's a lot happening there in relation to the R&D work that we're seeing at the moment. So moving into a different sphere, a non-therapeutic sphere, although we're seeing a lot of supplementation work now. Some of you may be aware that there's this issue that came up only last week about NMN. NMN was until last week classified as a safe food ingredient, but it's now been reclassified as a potential therapeutic for research. But we are seeing with the organizations that carry advertising on our platform, as well as organizations that we're helping getting funding, that they are actually now being applied into therapeutic applications. So I was speaking with 2 heart surgeons about mitoquinol only the other day. So you can see when you look down the list here that these are the things that we're all worried about. The big one up there, of course, is cognition, but mobility is up there as well. And as it is, that there are now supplements, so we're going to hear from some of those today. Tom from Ponce de Leon is here. You can see, again, attracting capital. They're all in human because they're all in the marketplace at the moment. And the interesting thing is that they are really a bridgehead for medication and therapies that we're now very familiar with. And I'll show you in a short while what I take myself. But likewise, the diagnostics that sit underneath all of this is also very interesting as a space. It is open to debate. But there are organizations that are taking blood draws, there are organizations that are taking epigenetic saliva samples and helping people understand the difference between their chronological age, how old they are, what the age of their last birthday was, but likewise their metabolic age, what is the actual underlying age that they have themselves. And again, a lot of capital going in, they're all in market, these organizations, and they're all helping people, whether it's through the microbiome or through supplementation, to achieve what I've actually achieved myself, which is to reduce my age. So as you can see here, I'm 55, but my metabolic age is 47. And here's my regime. Happy to talk about it, but of course I'm very pleased with that. You know, that's great to have that. And I think that there's a really interesting psychological score, because I don't want to lose 47. I want to stay 47 forever if I can. But likewise, as you'll see in a short while, if you're actually over your metabolically over your chronological age, that's again another interesting psychological attribute to how longevity is going to start communicating in the future as a sector. So despite the challenges, what's happening in the biotech area, you can see that from 2020 to 2021, there was a doubling of the industry. So a lot of capital coming into the sector. And as I've said earlier, we expect the sector, seeing the deal flow and knowing what's happening, that the sector in 2022 will actually exceed last year. We'll be counting that, and we'll be publishing a report in January about how that's actually manifested itself. But of course, there's more company formations. The difference in the line there, of course, is Altos. So Altos is the outlier. The capitalization was over 2 billion this year going into that company. So of course that has put a difference into the numbers. So if you take them away, of course the sector is suffering from the similar challenges as to the wider biotech sector. But you can see when you look at 2021 that when you look at the capitalization, that was later stage VC. And those seasoned investors in the room will probably understand that of course, was a lot of capital going into at the end of the bubble, as it were. And then when you look at where we are in 2022, that's completely changed. So the majority is early stage VCs. So this is organizations that are going back to earlier stage organizations to help them capitalize for their growth. So a very mixed picture. And that's reflective, of course, a lot of our lives at the moment. I'm sure some of you wouldn't be surprised by those charts. But of course, where the money is coming from is really, really important as well to understand that. You know, is it family offices? Is it VCs? Well, as you can see, the lion's share is coming through venture capital. But of course, there are a lot of individual investors helping early stage companies progress and move forward. And then when you look actually at the concept of where longevity is as an industry compared to other industries, I've mentioned biotech, a number of times already this morning. Biotech's a great benchmark for us to draw parallels to. But then you look at fintech, which of course is another one of those sectors that has grown phenomenally over the last number of years. You can see that there's actually a relatively similar trend between those two industries. And of course, you look on the right-hand side, the axis is pretty significant. And then this is how longevity looks by comparison. So it's 50x smaller. You can see that it's followed a very similar trajectory. The acceleration from 2020 to 2021 is pretty steep there. It's dropping off as others are. So it'll be interesting to see whether we can start to get that 50x number down as some of that capital moves from the biotech sector more actively into longevity. So a little word about us. We're an organization that is, as you can see here, we're media, so we run a consumer as well as a business platform to help education on both the sides of the industry there. Investment is what we do. We're an investment broker, so we do a lot of work now with big funds and early stage businesses, bringing those two organizations together to help capitalize and grow. And then we also have data intelligence, which, as you can see, is the data that I've shared with you today. So it's an investor conference, so we are capital raising at the moment. We've got a round at the moment that's open for 1 million. And really what we're looking to do over the next couple of years is consolidate our business and compound our brand and our activities to really grow the platform, because things are really happening out there. Our traffic is really significantly growing. And of course, these two platforms of B2B and B2C, we're seeing a lot of interest now from consumers, which is very heartening for us as an industry, both from a revenue perspective, but also a hearts and minds perspective. And then, as I mentioned, we have this brokerage business, which is this platform here where we've got different organizations. Some of them you're going to see today that are in these 4 pillars that I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation. And then we've got a very extensive network of very seasoned investors, as well as new entrants into the longevity investment marketplace. So I mentioned earlier my metabolic age and my chronological age, and I was at a conference on Monday of this week, and somebody was saying, a bit like zero carbon, this industry needs a number to focus on. And there's a N of 2 in the Newman household, because this is my wife Sophie. She's the same age as me, so we're both 55. My metabolic age is 47, but hers is actually 65. So she is actually 18 years older than me, which I haven't ever said this to her publicly, but she's old enough to be my mother, technically, metabolically. So the point is actually it's had a massive change in our home already. So she's exercising more. She's now supplementing. She thinks the amount of supplements I take in the morning is crazy, but she's starting to follow suit with me. And the point really is that aging is plastic. So we're running a test. Actually, Sophie's taking Rejuven, which is the Ponce de Leon product. And we've got a benchmark test now to understand whether we can bring down her metabolic age by supplementation. And that'll be very interesting. And we'll be running a public case study on her. But the key thing is that we are now in an industry that has formed. We're still in the foothills. There's still a long way to go. We're getting our vocabulary right now. I think that the rhetoric has moved around quite a lot from living for 1,000 years and living forever, now actually just talking about living for as healthy as long as possible. But likewise, we're seeing some action now in the investment side of the industry, which is really encouraging. It's growing. You're all here today to learn more about it, and you're already, a lot of you, participating in it already. But the point is really actually what we're doing is we're changing the healthcare model, and that's going to be a big job. And when we spoke with Professor Bell of Oxford a little while ago, and his view was that actually, most healthcare systems in the world are now screwed. But there are little beacons of things that we pick up because we're in the middle of the industry. And I was very heartened to learn that in Israel, at the Sheba University Hospital, they've now got, it's launched, but it's not officially launched publicly. That's next year. They now have a longevity department. So it's not an R&D department. It's a genuine longevity department where if you're over 40, you can go in there, you can get your bloods done, you can get your tests done. They will then give you an idea of your metabolic age. But the point is that actually that's got trained clinicians working in that space. It's being used for R&D, obviously, but it's actually open to the general public and it's free. And when you talk to somebody about what's happening in the NHS, you can start to see that when people realize, back to these big challenges of the world, one of the grand challenges for UK RI is to give everybody an extra 5 years of healthy living. Actually, we're going to achieve that by getting people to really understand the difference of their metabolics, their chronological age. So very exciting times ahead. Very exciting times in the Newman household. So hopefully my wife I'll get a younger wife soon, which will be very, very encouraging. And we've got a great number of organizations to come and talk to us today. And this is a mixture of very seasoned investors, organizations that are trying to attract capital from those investors, but everybody's pioneering. And I think it's all really encouraging. And I hope that by the end of today, when we hit 5 o'clock, you'll all feel the same as many of us do in the industry. As I say, those are the charts there. So let's get started. So thanks very much for your time, everybody. And I'm going to ask Aaron from Apiron to come and join us as our first keynote speaker. So please welcome Aaron.